So thank you all very much for joining us tonight on this cold, dark, and kind of rainy night. Really appreciate you joining us, and I'm going to give you a little bit of lay of the land. First, my name is Alan Black, and I am the Director of Operations at Harris County Flood Control District. So, again, a little bit of a lay of the land. I'm first going to talk a little bit about Harris County Flood Control District, who we are, what we do. I'll then turn it over to our project team to talk about two projects in particular that we've been working on in the South Mayde Creek watershed, which is a part of the Addicks Reservoir watershed. These two projects are two of many projects planned, not just in this watershed, but countywide. So bear that in mind, that many of our projects complement each other, and when you look at the big picture, what flood control really wants to do in this watershed, this is a part of that, a part of a bigger plan. But these are the two projects that we've recently completed some studies on, and we're ready to take that next step after seeking some input from the public. The Harris County Flood Control District is what's called a special purpose district. We were created in 1937 by the state legislature as primarily to be the partner with the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Our mission has since grown to where now today we own and operate and maintain more than 2,500 miles of channel countywide. We have a board of directors. It's our Harris County Commissioners Court. Interestingly enough, we're actually a separate entity from Harris County, but we share that same board of directors, so we work very, very closely with them. Our mission is pretty straightforward. That is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. And we do that primarily by widening and deepening channels and building stormwater detention basins to try and get that flood water, hold that, and keep that from getting into people's homes. We have 23 major watersheds across the county, one of which is the Addicks Reservoir watershed. And that's highlighted here, and that's where these two projects reside, so to speak. As I mentioned, our projects are primarily focused on widening and deepening channels and building stormwater detention basins. But we're not the only folks who own and operate facilities that drain water. And so this exhibit is intended to try and show that shared jurisdiction. So there's a neighborhood over on the left, and this might be a much older neighborhood that was built a long time ago when we had a different understanding of floods than we do today. Now we have a better understanding of how hard it comes down. Well, back then, many of the pipes that were put in for the storm sewers for that neighborhood may have been too small by today's standards. So whoever owns and maintains those streets and storm sewers might come to us and say, we'd really like to make the pipes bigger to get the water out of the neighborhood faster. The reason being is that there's actually two different types of flooding that happen in Harris County. There's local neighborhood flooding where the rain comes down so fast it just can't get into the channels fast enough. It backs up and gets into people's houses. But there's also what's called riverine flooding. That's where the water gets into the channel finally, but there's so much of it that it gets out of its banks and gets into people's homes that way. So what I'm trying to show here is those both types. You have flooding on the left in a neighborhood. The way to alleviate that is to increase the pipe sizes. But in our county, we're not allowed to transfer risk. We're not allowed to push the flood to somebody else. So while the pipes from the neighborhood might be made bigger to get the water out of the neighborhood faster, we have to capture that water to make sure it doesn't cause somebody else to flood that didn't flood before. And so that's why we build those stormwater detention basins like we show here. The neat thing about those stormwater detention basins is that they can serve three different purposes. They capture water coming from a neighborhood. They can also pull water off of our channels. When water comes up from the channels so much, instead of getting into people's homes, it flows into the basin. But the third unique purpose is that there's recreational opportunities. Now, where flood control doesn't and can't build recreation, we routinely work with sponsors such as Harris County Precinct 3 or MUD or the City of Houston if we happen to be in that area, and to say, hey, look, we're going to build this green space for a detention basin, but 9 times out of 10, most of the year, it's going to be dry. Do you want to do something? Maybe put a ballpark in the bottom or put some trails around the top of it. And so that's where we get this idea of shared jurisdiction. So So that brings us to the projects that we developed through what I like to call our summer roadshow last year. One of those meetings was actually right here in this facility. I hope that some of y'all had the opportunity to join us in that. And what came out of that was a list of 237 projects that we included on our $2.5 billion bond election. The promise to the voters is that we would take that $2.5 billion and do our best to leverage federal opportunities to build as much as $5 billion worth of projects. But what I'd like to point out, and this is where I like to indicate some of the proof in the pudding, why we're out here talking with y'all tonight, is that you'll see that 38 of those projects out of 237 were a direct result of the community input. These were ideas from the community that said, we think y'all should look at this, and we said, you're right, we should. And so we added that to the list. So the promise to the voters, again, $2.5 billion, trying to yield maybe as much as $5 billion worth of projects. Well, how does that happen? The federal government doesn't come to us and say, here's a big fat check, go do good work. Instead, they fill up lots of different programs, different pots of money that flood control then has to go out and apply for, compete for, advocate for, fight for in some cases. And this is intended to show what a lot of those programs are. I'm not going to go into much detail. I've already exposed my staff to an hour and a half's dissertation on what it takes to go through these programs. Instead, you guys look really nice. We'll move on to the next slide right after I at least highlight who those federal agencies are. These are the ones that we work with to try and access as much federal funding as we can. So over on the left is, of course, Harris County. Your property taxes pay for our $120 million a year appropriation. But then we have our great partners with the United States Army Corps of Engineers, some of which are here tonight. Again, that was one of the original purposes that Flood Control District was formed, and so we work with them, and right now our partners on a Hunting Bayou, Clear Creek, Braze Bayou, and White Oak Bayou federal programs. Those projects have been in the works now for really decades. Then we move on to the United States Department of Agriculture. Who knew? The NRCS. They're one of the primary funding partners of ours for making repairs to our channels after a disaster. After Hurricane Harvey, they are behind $80 million worth of repairs that we're making right now all across the county to our infrastructure. Yes, it's depressing to think that 2 years after the fact, we're just now getting those repair projects out, but that's an indicator of the pace at which federal funds have been known to flow. Then we get to FEMA, and FEMA has all kinds of programs. I'm not going to go into the main details, but I'm going to throw out some numbers and some acronyms. HMGP, Section 404, Section 406, PA, you name it. If there's an acronym, they've come up with it. I will pause for one moment. A couple of folks, I see you're taking pictures of the screen. No problem. You're more than welcome to do that. But we're also going to make sure and upload all these slides to our website either tonight or first thing tomorrow morning, along with a sound recording of how I'm talking and how the presenters after me will speak. So you'll be able to get all that way. No problem taking pictures, though. I just want to let you know you can download all of them later. So this slide is intended to illustrate the sort of feedback we received from the summer roadshow meeting we had last year in the Addicks Reservoir watershed. So it's categorized to help understand some of the feedback we received from y'all. There was approximately 23% that were interested in what's going on with other jurisdictions, what can we do with recreation. There were 20% that were interested in channel maintenance, and so on. There's some interesting statistics on helping to understand what is important to the community. What's important to us, of course, is our original mission to build flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. So with that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to our next presenter, and it's Jonathan St. Romain. Jonathan is a project manager at Harris County Flood Control District, and he'll be talking about these projects that we've been looking at. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Alan. As Alan mentioned, my name is Jonathan St. Romain. I'm the flood control project manager for these two projects we're going to go over tonight. And so we'll go over the full outline of our first project and then head into the second one. So the first project we're going to go through, it's kind of a mouthful because it's got a lot going on. It has two main components to it, channel improvements and bypass channel for South Mayde Creek. First, we'll go through where are we in this process, and we've got a lengthy process that we go through for all projects, and we've got this slide also on a big poster board in the back, because there's a life cycle for every project, and we've already completed this first one over here in blue, the feasibility study stage, and it's in the feasibility study stage that we look at all the possible projects that could happen, that we could do, that could make some kind of improvement, and then pick out which ones are going to work. And so we've gotten through that part, and we've picked out this channel improvements and bypass channel project and said, yes, this one's going to work, so let's move forward. And our next step that we're in the middle of right now is the preliminary engineering stage, or PER, for preliminary engineering report. You'll also see that we have highlighted here this green, that's right-of-way acquisition. That's going to apply to the second project we'll talk about tonight. The first project, that's the channel improvements and bypass, we don't have that right-of-way acquisition step in there. So that's good news for that one. So PER, what is a PER? Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do all these studies? Why can't we just get out there and dig? Well, there's a lot of details that we have to go through and figure out before we can really even enter our final design process. And so some of those steps include surveying. We've got to, in order to do our final design, we've got to get a nice detailed survey, the whole lay of the land, everything that's going on, both up on the surface for topographic survey, but also this next line here is utilities and pipelines. We've got to figure out what's in our way. Are there pipelines in the way? Utility crossings, who owns them? What are those constraints? Geotechnical, what's underneath the surface? We need a detailed geotechnical investigation so that when we dig, we know what we're going to run into. When we go into final design, what can our slopes be? What's going to happen with sand or silt or clay, and how does that impact our final design? Environmental, lots of environmental concerns on this, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but there's federal law, and we have to follow federal law when it comes to not only wetlands but also stream bottoms. And so there's extensive environmental studies that we do as part of this PER phase. And then maybe even kind of the meat of all this is our hydraulics and hydrologic modeling that we do. So we take all this information and we build these, we call them H&H models, hydraulics and hydrology. We build these models, build these channels, existing and proposed, and see what they do, see how they benefit the community, see what kind of benefits, water surface elevation reductions we can get from it, and look at all the different alternatives. As you get more and more into the details of these things, you've got to run these models because you find out there's lots of different ways to do things, and you want to do the best, or you want to come to the best conclusion and do the best option with taxpayer dollars and make sure that your facility that you're building is going to be the most efficient. So where are we? A little bit of a lay of the land and some existing conditions. So for our South Mayde Creek channel improvements and bypass channel, we can kind of point to some features here. Right through the middle, we have Greenhouse Road. Right through the middle, we have Greenhouse Road, runs north to south, and we're looking at the section of South Mayde Creek that comes from Barker Cypress all the way up to about Fry Road. And everything that's east or downstream of Greenhouse Road in this box, you can kind of see, that's U.S. Army Corps of Engineers property. That's Addicks Reservoir. What?
A little louder.
A little louder?
Just to make sure. Yeah.
Addicks Reservoir is in here, and then upstream of Greenhouse Road, we have South Mayde Creek that comes all the way to Fry Road, and that's our project area for the channel improvements and bypass channel. Now again, down here I mentioned this is Addicks Reservoir. That's U.S. Army Corps of Engineers property. So there's additional permits that we have to go through. And so we've had some constant coordination with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Lots of back and forth in determining what's going to be involved with those permits because it is their land. And for us to look at doing a project on federal property on their land, that just means that we've got to coordinate with them, and they're going to have requirements for us. So we know a little bit about the existing conditions in this area. We know we've had home flooding from recent storms. Other issues as well as that main issue is mobility. We know that oftentimes, even if homes aren't flooded, we have some mobility issues with some of our intense storm events. And then another condition that we run into is some sedimentation that we know is happening downstream of this area. And so we'll talk about that a little later. So what is this project? What are we looking at doing? The overview here shows you that upstream, so we'll get to your lay of the land again, Greenhouse Road right here in the middle. To the west, or upstream of Greenhouse Road along the creek, that's where we're looking at doing channel improvements. And next slide, we'll go into a little more detail about that. The bypass channel, we're looking at taking downstream from Greenhouse Road, downstream or east into the Addicks Reservoir. And then kind of a third or side component that's been added in is sedimentation. Third component that we have that's kind of a new component after some coordination with the Corps is sedimentation basins that we're looking at putting in this area. So the channel improvements. What does that mean when we say channel improvements or channel conveyance improvements? Well, really to put it simply, it means widening. In this area, South Mayde Creek, between Greenhouse Road and Fry Road, we've got 300 feet of existing Harris County Flood Control District right-of-way. That's a good thing. We can do channel widening in this area without going after additional right-of-way. And another note here is that there are walking trails that exist up on the kind of the tops of the side slopes, and those may be impacted, and so we would have to look at how those could get moved or replaced. So if we look at a cross section of this area, if you're standing down in the bottom of South Mayde Creek and you're looking downstream, you're in the bottom there and you can see trees up on your right and up on your left. You can see what this existing grade looks like. Well, there's actually a lot more room within the right-of-way we already own to excavate out on both the left and right sides of the channels. And so that's what we mean by channel conveyance improvements. Let's widen the channel as best we can. So moving on to the next component of our bypass channel. Now we're looking at east or downstream of Greenhouse Road, and we're proposing a bypass channel that connects into South Mayde Creek here, comes through the reservoir, and then connects back in just before Barker Cypress. And we're looking at a number of different options with this. Now, with all the options that we're looking at, there's a number of constraints and challenges that we've got to work through. And so that kind of gets back to what is a PER? Why do we do this PER? Well, we've got to work through some of these challenges. What are these challenges? First is we're proposing a bypass channel that connects here and connects back downstream in South Mayde Creek, but there's a tributary that comes in from the north right here. Well, what do we do with that? Where does that tributary connect in? What's the elevation of our bypass channel going to be compared to what the elevation of that tributary? If it's too high or if it's too low, how do we connect that in? What are the water rights? Can we intercept that tributary and just take it east through the bypass, or are there water rights issues to where we've got to make sure it keeps on going where it goes today? I mentioned these connections here. There's a couple different things to look at. Exactly where, at what elevation do we connect this bypass in to South Mayde Creek? We can connect it in at the very bottom, at the bottom of the channel, and then all flows would go around the bypass, or we can come in a little higher and only the higher flows would hit that bypass and come around. There's also considerable environmental issues with those options, as there's lots of rules regarding stream beds and impacting those stream beds from an environmental standpoint. We've also got this proposed bypass channel crossing a road, and so we've got to look at what happens to this road crossing here. Do we build a bridge? Do we put in culverts? What does that do to us hydraulically with our hydraulic models? What's the cost of putting in a bridge? Who would do that? This number 4 is just a general, how do we design this bypass to avoid both erosion and sedimentation? What are the velocities of the water coming through here for particular storm events? How can we prevent more sediment from being displaced? And then maybe most importantly to all this is show no impact. And by show no impact, I mean prove that there is no adverse impact. So because we're doing a project on Corps property, it's a Army Corps of Engineers requirement that we not adversely impact the water level or the rate of rise of the water within the reservoir. Well, it's also flood control's criteria, our own criteria for our own project, that anything we do, we cannot negatively impact other areas, either upstream or downstream. And so this is one of the main constraints, is how can we put in this bypass channel and not adversely impact the other surrounding neighborhoods. As Alan mentioned at the beginning, talking through storm sewer improvements. The county or whoever, your MUD or whoever owns the storm sewer isn't able to just upsize all the storm sewer in your neighborhood and then dump it all into our channels, because that would adversely impact others. And so this is the same thing. And so that's why we run our hydraulics and hydrologic models, our different configurations, to make sure that we don't do that, or to mitigate for any potential issues there may be. I mentioned sedimentation basins, and that was something that's come up with coordination with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the permit that we would have to get to do a construction project on their property. We would have to show that we're not bringing more sediment into the Addicks Reservoir, and that's a good thing, and we agree, and that's not something that we want to do, is build a project that's then just going to dump more sediment into the reservoir. And so now we've added a component to this project to look at sedimentation basins. And so again, more models that we need to run to figure out how do we build the basins, where can they be, how does water get into them to slow the water down enough to where sediment can fall out. We've got to be able to maintain these basins. We've got to be able to scoop the sediment out and haul it away. So all of those things is part of what we're looking at. So what are the results? After looking at all of these issues, what conclusion can we come to in terms of benefit for the community? Well, we think with the channel improvements alone, we can get up to 1.3 feet of peak water surface elevation reduction, and that's in the vicinity of neighborhoods between Greenhouse Road and Fry Road. And we're still working through the modeling on the rest of the components, but we can share with you now we've got about 1.3 feet of benefit, and that's peak water surface elevation reduction from the channel improvements component of the project. Where are we in the timing of all of this? Well, for the rest of this year, we're right in the middle of what we're doing tonight, gathering public input, working through the remaining challenges and continuing our modeling. And then spring of 2020, we hope to get this preliminary engineering report finalized, and then move into detailed design following that. And all through this process, as we get through these next steps, we would have communication with the communities as well through various formats. So I mentioned at the beginning, we've got 2 projects that we're looking at tonight. The second is stormwater detention basins on South Mayde Creek. So the first, we really dealt with channels and the movement of water, the channel improvements and the bypass channel. This project, it's a separate project, and it's looking at regional detention basins. So of course our purpose and our goals here to reduce the risk of structural flooding. Potentially these basins could mitigate for the earlier project we just talked about, the channel improvements and bypass. We'd like to improve mobility, as I mentioned before, and in these detention basins, the aim is to temporarily store excess water. What could these basins look like? We've got a couple of different options that you'll see all over Harris County, either flood control regional basins or many municipal utility districts will have both wet and dry bottom detention basins. Got a couple of examples here where the dry bottom, you can see it's normally dry. The bottom of that basin is going to be, has a slope on it so that water can kind of drain out and it can be mowed and maintained. A wet bottom basin that you see here, and it's the static water level or the permanent pool is the bottom of the basin, and so that can actually be flat. And because the quote bottom of that basin is flat, we can actually get some more volume if we have a wet bottom detention basin. We can also incorporate some nice environmental features, some native plantings and things like that. Where are we looking? Well, I mentioned at the very beginning when we went over what is a PER, what steps do we have to go to. You remember that green icon was highlighted, and that's right-of-way acquisition. So we've got a nice generic oval through the region because we're looking at a couple of 60-acre or so properties that are open land right now that flood control, we do not own them right now. So we like I said, we've got this generic oval, but these two properties are in this area. And so that's where we're looking at them to be located. These two basins, as we've gone through some of the modeling, we've determined that in what will be the western basin, we can get about 404 acre feet of storage. That's stormwater storage. In the east basin, almost 600 acre feet. But what's an acre foot? We talk about acre feet a lot. Well, look at a football field, and you get 272 feet down the football field. Not quite all the way. You get into the red zone, and then you go a foot high, and then you have the 160 foot wide. That gives you 1 acre foot. And so you can kind of imagine that these basins are hundreds of acre feet, which is a good amount of storage. And you can see the gallons number here, 131 million and 188 million gallons. What are some preliminary results from looking at this? Like I said, we're at the early stages of our PER, preliminary engineering report here, but we're looking at about or another half a foot to possibly a foot of peak water surface elevation reduction from a 100-year event. Where are we in this project? Well, again, for the rest of this year, we'll continue our report and our studies and gathering public input, and then that would put us moving down into detailed design by the summer of 2020, and then of course all of this is pending the right-of-way acquisition. So, after everything I've talked about, us doing preliminary engineering reports, these are projects that we have that are maybe in the future for construction. We've got a couple things, or we'll shift gears and go over a couple things that are happening right now. And so the things happening now are not necessarily related to projects that have just gone over tonight, but if you see construction, traffic, and equipment going up and down the area, they're probably related to these things that are going on. And we recently completed a desnag, a desnag effort, I think down in the Addicks Reservoir along the creek, and so we worked with the Corps on getting some folks in there to pull some trees and blockages out of that. So I think that's recently completed. Active right now is a repair effort, and that's on South Mayde Creek from Greenhouse Road up to Fry. I think it's up from Fry Road upstream of there to the west, and so that's repairing if there's damaged outfalls, any erosion repairs and sedimentation. Those are the types of things those crew will be doing. And then brand new or hot off the shelf is our desilt project that we just bid back in October, and that's a desiltation effort in the bottom of the creek to remove that sediment, and that is set to begin at the end of this year. So you can look forward to those projects. If you have questions on, and we'll break out into the open house portion in a second. If you have questions on those projects going on now, you can find, I will point to him, Matt Lopez in the back. And I think they'll be over there by our service requests thing. So with that, we will say we want to hear from you, and you can visit our website, and we've got the 2 projects that I talked about, hcfcd.org/C36 and C46. And I will turn this over to Herman.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening. My name is Herman Sanders. I'm with the Harris County Flood Control District Communications Department. On behalf of the Flood Control District, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out tonight, as we appreciate your time. I'd also like to recognize Ms. Claudia Morales. We'd like to recognize any elected officials that come out. She's she's with the Representative Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher. And so thank you for being here this evening. And we do know that you have questions. We want to invite you to the back of the room in just a few moments. We have our Harris County Flood Control District engineers, professionals, and consultants that are here to answer your questions to the best of our ability, and we're looking forward to seeing you and talking with you. Also want to point out that we have Harris County Engineering Department here with us this evening at this table right here, and they're here to talk to you about the subdivision drainage improvements. A lot of projects going on in the area. We also have the United States Army Corps of Engineers that are here at the next table over. They're here to talk to you about any reservoir questions you may have. We also have Harris County Project Recovery on this side. They're here to talk to you if you've had any damage from Hurricane Harvey. They want to help you out with that. We also have Harris County Flood Control District service requests over here. So if you have any issues with fallen trees or the grass is growing too high in certain areas and whatnot, you can talk to the gentleman over there. That's Dylan Epley. Lastly, I want to encourage you to please fill out the comment cards that we handed out to you when you got here. We take all of your comments to heart. We look at them, we review them, and we utilize the information to go forward in the process, in the project process. So again, we want to hear from you. Please join us in the back of the room now. We want to answer your questions. This ends the formal part of the presentation. Thank you again for all coming out this evening.